Hi, this is Sarit Switzer, and welcome to the It Is Taught podcast, a podcast devoted to the teachings of Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi as recorded in his most famous work, the Tanya. My hope for this show is to make these teachings accessible and relatable to the average person, regardless of prior Jewish education or affiliation. The episodes follow the prescribed daily study portions and are meant to serve as practical lessons in how to live your life as your true self and develop an authentic and powerful relationship with your Creator. I have personally experienced the effects the study of this work has had on me, and I'm excited to share what I can of this knowledge with you. So please join me on this journey of learning, self-growth, and connection with your source. Hi, and welcome to the It Is Taught podcast. This is episode 681 for the 19th of Tishrei in a regular year. So the message of today's episode is such a foundational and essential one in Judaism. It's something that we really need to keep in mind. It's the basis of so much of our lives, of our purpose down here in the world. What is that? The message? The message is to look at others in a favorable way, to not be judgmental towards other people, to be humble towards others, to never see yourself as higher than anybody else. Now, I think it's interesting to think about this message and in the context of the epistle that we've been learning so far in the past few days, and how this message actually comes at the conclusion of the epistle, the conclusion of the addendum of the epistle, actually. So if you've been following along, and please go back and review if you haven't, we've been learning Epistle 22, which for the large part was really all about the idea of how to accept suffering or hardships that we experience in our lives in this world. And how the Alter Rebbe started off by really rebuking his Hasidim for coming to him with all of their worldly concerns when he didn't feel that this was his role. He didn't feel that this is what people should be coming to him for. And in fact, it turned into like a deeper rebuke about the idea of a lack of acceptance of physical suffering. We spoke about that quite in depth, about the idea of how to accept physical suffering, how it really is all about humility, about recognizing the facts that anything that's happening to us is really coming from God, from a good place. And it's actually for our benefit. It's a form of cleansing, and that we really need to actually examine our deeds if we're experiencing anything negative in our lives and realize that we're not deserving of anything. There's no entitlement going on. So, and then yesterday we spoke about the idea of really approaching God with prayer in this very direct and kind of stubborn way. And what really ties all of these themes together from what I'm gathering from the text, is the idea of simplicity, is the idea of the Alter Rebbe actually uses the term simplicity. Towards the end of yesterday's section, he talks about the idea of avodat tamah, the service, a very simple service, that this is how we're supposed to serve God, is without these, calculations, overthinking, analysis, whatever. Just serve God, You need something, pray, daven to Hashem. Something negative is happening to you, accept it. This is from Hashem. This is something good happening to you. It's for your benefit. And today, this message is really going to extend into the way that we relate to our fellow man, our fellow woman, it could be, just our fellow Jew. And really just thinking the best of our fellow Jew and not having all these, thoughts and analysis in our heads and judgmental, specifically, thoughts in our head about somebody else. But in fact, looking at everybody in a really favorable way and really understanding the idea that we're all one. The Alter Rebbe speaks about the idea in today's episode about how we're all chaverim. Chaverim in Hebrew, in modern Hebrew, is friends, We can also see it as like our fellow. But the interesting thing about the word chaverim, chaver, is it's connected, as we'll see in the text, to the word chibur, which means connection, to actually be connected. So this is actually, it's not, an accident. It's not coincidence. In fact, this is very true, that all us Jewish people, we're all one family. Perek Lamed Bet of Tanya, that's a much earlier in the Tanya, we talked about the idea that we're actually all one soul, and any division that we see amongst ourselves is actually not real. It's just superficial. So the Alter Rebbe today is kind of bringing us back to that idea, and to make us really realize that we really are connected, we really are all one, and that we should not see anybody in a negative way, and that this is a really horrible thing to do, is to judge people and to not judge people favorably. And one of the interesting points that the Alter Rebbe brings up in the section today, as we'll see, is the idea of lashon hara, gossip, or speaking negative talk is the literal translation of it. And as many of us already know, the sin of lashon hara is really, really grave. People liken it to murder, even, because it's like embarrassing somebody or taking away the blood from their face. So this is like taking away their life from their face when somebody gets embarrassed. The Alter Rebbe is actually going to say that lashon hara is actually equivalent to the 3 cardinal sins of not only murder, but also gilui arayos, adultery, and idolatry. So it's pretty bad. And just to kind of really emphasize the point, the Alter Rebbe will take this point further and say that, okay, if lashon hara, speaking negative thoughts, is so bad, all the more so even just thinking negative thoughts in your minds. Somebody might think, I didn't say it out loud, I just thought it in my head. Like I looked at the person, I was thinking something, but I held myself back. I didn't say anything. No, actually the thoughts are really actually more powerful than speech in a certain sense. This is another theme that comes up in Tanya, the power of our thoughts, and how thoughts really do, because they come from this higher place, because they don't have the same limitations that speech does. Thoughts actually are more powerful than speech in a certain way. And so this section that we're going to learn today is really actually not only about guarding your speech, guarding your tongue, but actually about guarding your thoughts, retraining your thoughts to think positively towards other people, not being judgmental towards other people, judging people favorably, being simple, being humble towards other people. So it's a really simple, straightforward message today, but it's also a very, very deep message and a very essential message. So with that being said, let's get into the text and see how the Alter Rebbe breaks this down. Once again, for context, we're going to be concluding Epistle 22 today. And it's, as we mentioned yesterday, this is actually an addendum to chapter 20, to Epistle 22. And so today is the second half of that addendum. And so today we're going to be concluding that addendum. So here we go. So the Alter Rebbe begins, and he says that also, so meaning, again, continuation from yesterday, we spoke about prayer, about, approaching God in this stubborn way towards prayer. Now the Alter Rebbe says, also, I also want you guys, says the Alter Rebbe, not to cast aside what my words, which meaning to say that he's going to be giving a reiteration of something that he's taught previously, that every person be upstanding and walk with integrity, just as God made a person to stand upright. And he brings here a citation from Echa, chapter 27, verse 29, where it says, Asa ha'elokim et ha'adam yashel. So Hashem made us standing upright on 2 legs. And the Alter Rebbe is saying that this basically is teaching us that we need to act and behave and live in an upstanding, upright way. So what does this mean? So the Alter Rebbe says that what this means is that he should not seek numerous calculations. He shouldn't make cheshbonash, it's called in Hebrew, about regarding why it is that people do different things and the thoughts and machinations of people. So meaning to say that you shouldn't try to start thinking too much or analyzing people too much about why it is that they do different things and try to figure it out and assume that people are scheming and things like that. Because to figure out the motivations of a person, this is the realm of heaven. This is not the job of a person of flesh and blood. So to try to figure out, to judge people, basically, to think about oh, that person, yeah, I see what they're doing. I know what's going on behind closed doors or whatever. Sure, they're really successful in business, but do you know why? Because of blah, 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 whatever it is, it's that's not your job. That's God's job to judge people and to figure out what it is, why they do what they do, but you should not do this. Rather, what should you do? You should believe with full faith in the mitzvah that comes from our sages, that you should be humble of spirit before every person. This comes from Pirkei Avos, chapter 4, verse 10. And this is one of my favorite things in all of Judaism. One of my favorite teachings in all of Judaism is this idea of being humble in spirit before every person without exception. I truly believe, this is my own personal take here, that if we all did this, the world would be such a beautiful place. Perhaps that is what would bring Mashiach. It's such an important principle that's often overlooked, is this idea of humility, and humility not just before God, but before every person. So now going back to the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe says because it's a true thing. Like why should we have a spirit before every person? Because it's true. Truly, we can become better through our fellow. So. And this is such a deep principle. There's so much to say here about this, that the only way that we can really improve is through other people. If we were just like in solitary confinement our whole lives, we would not have any reason to improve ourselves, really. That's, or maybe we would improve ourselves to a certain extent, but really what pushes us to improve, what pushes us to develop and grow is our interactions with other people. And we're all interconnected. And now here the Alter Rebbe brings a citation here from Shoftim chapter 20, verse 11, where it says, Kol ish Yisrael ke ish echad chaverim, that all the people of Israel are together like one person. So just like one person, meaning to say we're all like one, we're all one. Just like you see a person is made up of many different organs that are all very different, but they all affect the heart, because the heart is where life comes from. So too are we all like one person. And the service of the heart, which is prayer, so this is bringing us back to the first part of the section today, is what connects us back to our source, to the fact that we are all one. And then the Alter Rebbe says that from the positive, you can infer the negative. So he's sort of not spelling it out explicitly here, but what he's basically saying is that just like the first part is that prayer and unity and Jewish unity are very much interrelated, in the sense that when a person prays, what they're doing is they're tapping into that source of the unity. They're tapping into the heart of the Jewish people, which, just like the heart of the body connects all of the organs, the heart of the Jewish people connects all people together. So this is a good conduit. Prayer is a good conduit for getting to that place of recognizing the unity of all Jewish people. So too does it work in the negative, that if, God forbid, people don't have a good prayer and their prayer is lacking, God forbid, that could lead to divisiveness amongst Jewish people. And so now the Alter Rebbe says this is why it's taught in Tzefania chapter 3 verse 9, Ulavdo Shechem Echad, to serve Hashem with one purpose. Specifically one purpose. So meaning we're supposed to be united. We're not all just supposed to be like serving God in little isolated islands. There's supposed to be this unity there. So he says that this is why, my beloved friends, he says, please, he's pleading with his chassidim, he's pleading with his followers to really implant and engrave the love of one's fellow in their heart. And here he brings a citation from Zechariah chapter 8 verse 17. V'ish et ra'at ere'ehu al tachshavu bilvavchem. Let none of you consider in your heart what is evil for his fellow. So meaning to say that a person shouldn't sit and contemplate and think about how a person that they know has negative motivations and is, evil and all of that kind of stuff. And then the Alter Rebbe goes on and he says, not only should this not be something that a person should spend time thinking about, but in fact, it shouldn't even be aroused in your heart. It shouldn't even come up in your heart in the first place. And if it does come up, because sometimes it's true that, we can't always control our initial thoughts, then a person should push it away. They should push these thoughts away, just like one would push smoke away, as if it was an actual idolatrous thought, as if it was a thought of actual avodah zarah, actual idolatry. Why? That's pretty severe, right? That just having a momentary thought that maybe someone has not the best motivation to do something. Why is this considered avodah zarah, idolatry? Because we know that lashon hara, slanderous speech, speaking negatively about somebody else, is considered to be a greater sin than avodah zarah and gilui arayos and shvichos damim. So it's considered. So there's 3 cardinal sins in Judaism, the worst possible sins that a person can do. This came up the other day where actually my contortion teacher asked me, who's not Jewish, asked me, what are the 3 worst things a Jewish person can do? And I said there's these 3 things. There's avodah zarah, idolatry, gilui arayos, idolatry, and shvichos damim, which is bloodshed. And these 3 things, the reason why these 3 things are considered to be so bad is for anything else in Torah, let's say if somebody put a gun to someone's head, God forbid, that should never happen, and tells them that they have to either eat pork or be killed, then the person's actually allowed to eat unkosher food. A person's allowed to break Shabbos. A person's allowed to do many things in Judaism if the penalty would be that they would have to give up their life. We don't have to give up our lives to fulfill most of the things in Judaism. However, there are 3 exceptions. The 3 exceptions are idolatry, adultery, and bloodshed. So now, and those three things, a person must give up their lives rather than commit those three things. So those are really, really severe things. But now what the Alter Rebbe is saying here is he's saying that as bad as those three things are, Lashon Hara is actually worse. Speaking negatively about someone else is worse than these three things. There are explanations about this in other places that talk about this in more detail, about how Lashon Hara actually is likened to these three sins, and how it is actually like these three sins on a small level, to a small degree, or maybe even a large degree, according to the Alter Rebbe here. And so now the Alter Rebbe goes on and he says that if this is the case with speaking slanderously, speaking negatively about somebody else, then we already know that there's a principle that a person's thought has a greater impact than their speech. So thought is not something to be dismissed lightly. Thinking is actually something very, very powerful. We believe this very strongly in Judaism, especially when you start learning Chassidus about the power of thought. And this is true whether it's for good thinking, or negative thinking. You know, like the Rebbe taught this idea of tracht good with sein good, think good and it will be good. And this wasn't just a simple platitude. This is a really powerful thing, that if you think good, it will bring good things. And this is where the Alter Rebbe ends, and then he concludes with a final blessing where he says, and the good God should bless his nation with peace, and should bring upon you peace and life forever, as is the wish of him who loves you deeply from heart and soul. So again, so just as the Alter Rebbe started off with terms of endearment, he ends off with a blessing here. So it's a kind of sandwich the rebuke and the kind of like the more commanding nature of this section today. He couches it in these more loving phrases. So that's it for today. So in sum, so just the main idea is, again, when you're relating to God, then pray with sincerity, pray with stubbornness, really just be there, show up, don't take it, don't just rush through your prayers or anything like that. And in praying in this way, this actually will connect you and help you to connect to the heart of the Jewish people, which is that which connects all of us. And hopefully that can help you be humble in the face of every person, and thus judge people favorably, and just have this really deep love of your fellow man, not just in your actions and your speech, but also in your thoughts. So that's it for today, and we'll continue tomorrow when we begin a new epistle, and I'll speak to you then. Thanks for listening to the It Is Taught podcast, hosted by Sarit Switzer. This podcast is dedicated in loving memory of my maternal grandfather, Avraham Yitzchak ben Binyamin HaKohen of blessed memory. Music by Shoshana. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support the show, please share it with others and subscribe on YouTube, Apple iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And make sure to leave us a 5-star review. To find out more about the It Is Taught project, including more information on my soon-to-be published book, please visit our website, itistaught.com. To catch the latest from me, follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Looking forward to speaking with you tomorrow, and until then, have a great day.